Hello everyone. In my last class, I gave you an overview of the common fallacies of verbal reasoning. From now on, in my next few classes, I shall be discussing each fallacy separately and in detail. So today we are going to discuss inductive fallacies, a group of fallacies based on the survey of samples which have some problem with them. So there is some defect in the samples that are surveyed and from whose results the author is giving the evidence. So the first one is too small a sample. So if a group is very big, only a few people out of it are sampled, therefore it becomes a scope mismatch. The scope of the evidence is too small compared to the scope of the conclusion. So it is basically a scope mismatch. The second is an incomplete or partial sample. That means it does not include all the subsets of a set. So it has to be a cross-sectional sample, otherwise it becomes an incomplete or partial sample. Abnormal or atypical sample means you take something that is not average or normal and consider it to be the average. So here is an example of these three fallacies in one argument. The idea that factory workers are dissatisfied with their working conditions is false. Now the first thing we have to do is identify the conclusion. So we got this as our conclusion. And why does the author come to this conclusion? Because of the remaining statements which are called premises. He says 70% of the 100 shop floor workers out of the total 1000 workers in a factory said that they were happy with the food provided during working hours. Now if you see, first of all, 70% of 100 would mean 70 out of the total number of 1000 workers. So 70% of 100 would seem like a sizable sample, but it is actually just 100 people who have been surveyed. So that means just 10% of the workers have been surveyed, and out of that 70% are saying something. So this is too small a sample. Secondly, it is an incomplete or partial sample because the workers who have been surveyed are only the shop floor workers. There are many other types of factory workers who have not been included in the survey. So this is an incomplete or partial sample. And finally, if there are just a few shop floor workers, it means that it will become an atypical sample. It's not the average factory worker. And finally, it is again a partial sample because working conditions includes many other factors apart from food provided during working hours. Alright, maybe it is not well lit, maybe it is not well ventilated. So these are also other factors that are part of working conditions. Maybe there is harassment by their bosses, or maybe they have to work double shifts for just 1.5 shift pay. So none of them have been included. Just the food provided during working hours is satisfactory, is what they are saying. So this is called inductive fallacies. Now if I will give you a simpler example which you will understand better. So everybody should exercise. This is a very simple example. Everybody should exercise. John exercises. John exercises and John is healthy. So here the author recommends exercise to everybody. The assumption is that exercise is good for health, and the evidence for this is the example of John. Now here the problem is the conclusion is made for everybody, but the sample is of only John. Now one sample generalized to everybody is an extremely small sample. Second, it is an incomplete or partial sample because everybody includes subsets also Specifically, the other bigger subset would be women. Not a single woman has been surveyed, so the subsection women has been left out. So that is an incomplete or partial sample. And if John is an athlete, okay, if John is just not an ordinary person, if he is an athlete, he is not an average person. He is somebody who is always doing things for his body. So that is why this sample would become an atypical sample also. Now, these fallacies work in our day-to-day lives and make our lives complicated. For example, we have one or two bad experiences with a new acquaintance. At once we conclude, he's always like that. He's very stingy. Then we generalize from this small sample and we say that all of them are like that. All of his community are like that. And if that person is someone that is atypical or abnormal, like a terrorist, we say that all of them are terrorists. So these fallacies make our life very complicated. So before passing any judgment or coming to any conclusion, we must wait, we must study more cases, we must study all types of cases, and we must study the average samples. So that's all for today. Next time I shall be discussing with you causal fallacies.